But first, in 14 years since Australia ratified the Kyoto Protocol, we've gone from under 10% renewable generation to just over 20%. At this rate, it's going to take us until 2090 to generate 100% of our current electricity demand from renewables. But to reach net zero, we also need to electrify transport and a variety of industrial uses, increasing our total electricity demand 2.5 to 3 times. Now, this is going to require a huge increase in renewable energy and even faster deployment than we've seen to date. Now, it doesn't stop there. Once you move beyond 25% penetration of renewables, you need storage and a vastly expanded transmission network. No one knows for sure exactly by how much, because while we know wind and sun aren't always there, we don't know for how long and what worst case we need to prepare for. This will require huge quantities of raw materials to do this, and we'll have to find them at the same time as the rest of the world is doing exactly the same thing. Well, good luck with that. Now, if our politicians are going to honour their commitments to net zero, they're going to think differently, need to think differently, just as politicians overseas are. This is why you're now seeing plans in countries like the USA, China, India, United Kingdom, the UAE, South Korea and Japan to increase the percentage of their electricity that comes from nuclear. Nuclear emits less CO2 than solar and a similar amount to wind. It doesn't need batteries or storage and has been used safely around the world for 70 years. Now, some people tell me that nuclear is too risky. These are often the same people who say that climate change is an existential threat. So what do they want? Certain destruction because renewables can't do the job in the time, or an existing technology with a risk that has been managed responsibly since 1954. It's time to end the nuclear ban. Well, Jacinta, why don't you get the ball rolling? What do you reckon?
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, nuclear is, you want to talk about clean energy? Nuclear is clean energy. And I think there's a lot of stigma attached to nuclear energy. And I think the fear around it is utterly irrational. I mean, here in Australia, we have the world's largest resources in terms of uranium, and yet we're exporting it to other parts of the world. I think we should be taking advantage of it right here in our own country. Clean energy for Australia, reliable energy at the same time. And when it came to Fukushima, the problem, of course, with Japan is that they chose to build a power plant right on the water, as well as the fact that they are often experiencing seismic activity. And in fact, no one actually died from radiation because of the Fukushima disaster. However, there were deaths due to the actual tsunami itself. So I think we've got to move away from this irrational fear and start thinking about this as a serious energy here in Australia.
Like, I think we really do actually have to get it on the debate around this country and get people talking about it and try and actually promote the fact that there actually haven't been a string of dangerous events. There's been a few quite isolated incidents. But Stephen, to you, you've always struck me as being an extremely pragmatic member of the Australian Labor Party. What do you reckon?
Well, look, I'm probably going to disappoint you because, unlike you or any other panellist, I've lived next to a nuclear reactor. My uncle used to be the secretary of the Sellafield Workers' Union in the northwest of the UK. My uncle used to be in charge of carrying the Geiger counter around the countryside, checking on the spills and the contamination and being part of the cover-ups around the Sellafield nuclear power plants. And I've sat there where my cousins who work at Sellafield, and still do today, when they don't come home in the evening because there's been a bit of an incident in the nuclear power plant, and they've got to be tested to see whether they're contaminated or not. And I've waited with my cousins, their wives, while they see what time their husbands are coming home. So tragically on this one, if the definition of pragmatic and sensible is pro-nuclear, I'm probably going to have to be on the wrong side of this particular debate. All of the things I've just said are true.
That's a very...
and this And
Well, that's a very
notwithstanding
interesting
your belief that
personal
nothing's
perspective
really
there.
gone, not that, no, I haven't finished yet, and notwithstanding your claim that since 1954 it's done safely, Sellafield, as it's called now, or Windscale, it was called in 1957, leaked all over the local countryside in one of the first serious nuclear accidents in 1957, as I said, and they only had to throw the milk away for a month because it wasn't safe to drink.
It's a pretty old
But I look
plant,
forward to
though. You've
Jacinta
got to
advocating.
admit
No, I fully accept that my personal experience is based on an old plant, but I look forward to Jacinta advocating on behalf of the town of Alice Springs having a nuclear power plant or nuclear waste dump in and near Alice Springs, and then I'll take her seriously.
Well, let's face it. I mean, we reap the benefits of you know what it brings in terms of, you know, when we're talking about people who need treatment for cancer and radiation therapy and those sorts of things. We have to do that. We have to save people's lives. We've got a vast amount of space in our country that I think we could safely have one, and I'd certainly love to see the comparisons between those who have been affected by nuclear, the generation of nuclear energy and the generation of other energy, and certainly find a comparison between, you know, who's died from what and how many deaths have been related to all kinds of nuclear energy generation.
Jacinta, Jacinta, I'm also reflecting that Lucas Heights has been operating in basically the southern suburbs of Sydney for many, many years, and every time a US aircraft carrier visits our shores and parks, say, for example, in the Brisbane River, we've essentially got a package reactor sitting there, and they're coming and going all the time. But Emily, time for you to have a go here.
Yeah, well, Stephen's not the only one that has grown up quite close to a couple of nuclear power plants. I grew up in Washington State, and there's nuclear power plants along the Columbia River. But to be honest, I don't know much about them because they never really affected our lives. There were never any incidents of spills that I am aware of. So it was pretty calm. And I do think that precautions need to be taken, as with any new technology. But nuclear energy is probably one of our safest options out there. Yes, a nuclear meltdown sounds really scary. We heard horror stories like Fukushima, like Chernobyl, and it's terrifying. But they are one-off incidents that don't happen very often. And while they could be catastrophic, I think we have learned quite a bit from our mistakes. We can learn from what other countries have done. And we are very much in the place now here in Australia, the country that doesn't get as many earthquakes, that has lots of land where we can put a nuclear power plant far away from lots of people, from anyone really. We only use about 0.22% of the land here in Australia. There's a lot of space to put a nuclear power plant safely away from people, safely away from our city centers. And I think we should. I think we could benefit from the cheap renewable energy. We need that in Australia. We need it now.
Look, I'd like to go back to you, Stephen, with just to put this on the table. I mean, again, the math shows, though, that we cannot transform the transport infrastructure of this country, going to electric vehicles by renewables. It just isn't going to happen. So it's really, seems to me we've got to have some baseload power. If coal is out of the question, and by the way, I'm a big coal supporter, I'd be happy to stay with coal, but let's just assume for this debate that's off the agenda. So it seems to me to get baseload power that actually would get behind the policy of Anthony Albanese, which is to have electric vehicles being incentivised, then we've got to look at these sort of solutions and the new technology reactors.
No, look, I think it's a very reasonable debate to have, Campbell. As you can see, I do have some genuine personal experience, and my family has lived with it, not nearby, worked in it, and lived next door to it, literally next door to it. But your point that, if you're going to rule coal out, well, I love watching the Greenies torture themselves on this one. I love watching Greenies who spend their entire lives campaigning against nuclear power suddenly decide that it's okay now. I haven't changed my position. It's the Greens who've changed theirs. I'm more like you though, Campbell. I think that the baseload issue is being downplayed by the Greens and those who advocate for renewables. I don't think we can jump off the cliff that they want us to jump off. Unfortunately, I don't think we can get the technology and the personnel and people and skills you would need in a short enough time frame for the nuclear industry to be able to set up and actually provide the sort of benefits that you would hope for. I think it'll be a 15, 20-year journey. I have met and talked with people who work on the latest smaller, much smaller nuclear power generating technology, and they have a very interesting proposition to be listened to. I don't say I agree with it, but they've got a very interesting proposition. But I did not quite catch Jacinta in the finishing of her comments offering to lead the campaign at the next Alice Springs council meeting to set up a nuclear power plant or dump next to Alice Springs. I missed that part.
Look,
Jacinta, can you help me out here? I must be going deaf.
Well, in defence of, we've got to wrap this little bit up, but in defence of Jacinta, I'll just say the point. Every time a US aircraft carrier visits Brisbane or other cities around our nation, there is a package plant in the river, sitting there, a nuclear plant in the river. And for example, what if someone went and hired a ship and had a reactor on and just brought it alongside in Brisbane and started generating power? Same deal. Anyway, we'll wrap that up right there.
Well, as you know, I support every visit of those US ships.
I'll give you a heads up when that council meeting arrives.
Okay.